beginning, to start with, beginning with this, with saying people, hey, let's be, live in harmony with rats. I think it's not the right option right now. Maybe in the future, but I think that I can imagine because we have a lot of problems that we associate with rats, but take food supply losses. For example, in Western societies, that may not be such a big deal because we have so great amount of losses of food within the whole food production and consumption chain. That 20% of losses because of rats. It's not maybe it's not such a big deal. But for example, for people living in global south, in many countries that are, this for them, this 20% may be the question of life and death. And I can imagine that, for example, I'm a person who is, very poor and lives in a poor country, and I have only my small plot of land, and it's the only thing I have. And then rats just eat 20% of my food, which means that I will be starving. And someone comes and say, hey, let's go, make friends with your rats. And this is, I don't think this is the thing we should start with. We should start with policy, with changing the policy, at the, not grassroots level, but rather somewhere, talking with authorities. Of course, very, very difficult, but I think it's still easier than changing people's attitudes to rats. This is my opinion.
And maybe a comment. Oh, sorry. You got an unusual panel here. You've got immigration and rat control. It just doesn't seem to go together very well. Except that if you go back in time for maybe 9 months ago, there were GOP operatives who were calling immigrants rats. Okay, and if you take that a little bit further, you look at our lexicon of everything bad about anybody is associated with rats. So maybe you can make a comment on here. So Mara is discussing immigration and has an interesting idea that we're going to be able to change the culture down in Arizona sometime soon, which I don't think is going to happen. But maybe you could address our thought of immigrants as rats versus Gabrielle's concern about changing our image of rats in this country, which seems like totally impossible.
Thank you for this comment. It's great. In Europe we have this immigrants crisis, right? And I think that there is a very interesting, thing that when we talk about invasion, the word invasion ecology. It's not only about rats, but many animal species. And when we think about the whole, how this narrative is built and how we convey this message to people, why should they be afraid of, and they are so similar to how we describe immigrants in Europe, for example. I think you may have the same problems here in the States, that we say, okay, they are aliens, they are, I think that invasion ecology is one of the most interesting, not in a bad way, of course, issues that to consider within critical animal studies. That's really important. So, you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to change the entire culture of Arizona anytime soon. I don't think I said that. I think that we have a responsibility to attempt to, and that there are organizations where there are people already thinking intersectionally and working really hard to try to. So I think that those are important to pay attention to. Also, yeah, I agree with you. I think we see the construction of immigrants as similar to the construction of this idea of pests, of beings that are associated with disease, dirt, and crime. I don't think rats it's not exactly crime, but we do use the term.
Food.
Yeah, they steal our food, they steal our jobs, things like that. So, yeah, I think that speciesism and fear of immigrants absolutely work together, and we can see a lot in how discussions about population control of pests or of people, there's a lot of similarities there. So I think that's a great point. Something to think about.
Yeah, I want to draw on something that Gabriela mentioned, or I don't know if I understood well, regarding that animal rights campaign built on empathy, and then they select animals that are more simple to build empathy on, but with rats that wouldn't work so well. So I would ask you if you have any ideas of how to create empathy with rats. That would be one. And I would like extend the question about empathy to the other, Bumbara and Matthew, about their own discussions on how could we create empathy between farmers and cow and transform our way to understand it, and about museums, probably picking up from or starting from what we already have as a museum, with all criticize that could be done to what's already set up in the museum. But is there a chance to create empathy, but taking up what it's already there?
Sure, yeah. I guess with museums, I mean, I just saw it as, at least I guess within the 19th century, because that's the main period I study, as a kind of telling signifier of our kind of relationship with now, which is kind of object-based instead of subject. So it's the objectification of it, and many times now it's not even a live animal. So you don't have the chance, it's to be observed, I guess, as well as observed. So, but I mean, in terms of increasing empathy, I mean, like you were saying as well, instead of viewing rat populations as a swarm, if we are able to see them individually, that's a start, because it's easy to, I mean, I was just doing some research too, and it's funny, it come up that humans are the most populous animals, there's like 7 billion, rats are just right underneath. So, yeah, so if we place ourselves also, if we kind of decenter our own self and think about human populations as better than prolific, then that's you can gain some sort of bridge of empathy as well. Yeah.
Okay, how to build empathy towards rats? Well, I think it's a tough question, and not because of the species, because we actually managed to gain support towards rats in the lab, but because of the context that rats in the lab are associated with something sterile, safe, and so they are clean, right? So we can feel the empathy towards them. But when we take a sewer rat who is dirty, who spreads disease, people are, that's really difficult, because people usually are so there are so many phobias. You know, I'm anti-immigrants phobia, anti-rats phobia, and so on. So it's so hard to work with it because even because we have facts, right? Of course, rats can spread disease, but there's another fact also that the possibility, I mean, the chances are very, very small that you contract a disease from rat. Of course, you may contract it from your cat as well. For example, toxoplasmosis, right? But it's hard to change people's opinions on this because it's. I mean, yeah, I agree that perhaps we should focus on, saying that they are individuals, right? Because this is the beginning. But still, in my opinion, we should like try to change law, change these directives. For example, in Europe, we have the Biocidal Products Directive that claims that animal welfare issues are very important and should be taken into account while choosing the methods of extermination. But at the same time, this particular document provides, I mean, it allows anticoagulants that are extremely inhumane, right? So I think that we should focus. I mean, I think that your question, of course, is very, very important. But I'm afraid I don't have an easy answer to it. I should, my opinion is that we should focus on changing the legislation, and so that's the start. That should be the starting point, right?
I think that it would be obviously, and it is easier to work with folks who are not, directly profiting off of these industries first and trying to shift opinions and attitudes and increase empathy. Obviously, that would be easier. But if we are focusing on, say, ranchers or rural communities, I think in increasing empathy towards animals or towards immigrants, I noticed that so all of the interviews that I did were in the form of field trips, but I kind of tried to view them as also not so much just a space to interview, but also to dialogue and ask some critical questions that tried to get kind of at the emotions of the folks that we were speaking with. So like when I heard the Border Patrol talking about like how much it meant to them to be able to save people's lives in the desert, like following up with that question of like, well, that is amazing. How does it feel then to hand them over to the detention centers that you don't know much about? And even though their answer, that was just like a very short interaction, but and their answer wasn't, it wasn't as if they were able to say, yeah, oh, that is a really good point. But they definitely sort of like thought for a little bit longer, and I could see they were a little uncomfortable. But also, like, I think that there was room there to maybe ask a few more follow-up questions, or that was at least, I think, a question that could maybe shift some folks, not everyone, but maybe occasionally a Border Patrol agent to think a little bit more about the impact that they're having on these folks' lives. And also I think that they're just viewing any like conversation as a possibility to discuss these issues critically, and I think within these communities that's not what's happening usually. So like one of the students was like, well, were you ever critically, did you ever explore like what policies are causing folks to want to migrate here? And of course they don't within Border Patrol academies, because then no one would want to do it, or I hope so. So I think trying to view those opportunities where you do get to come into dialogue with Border Patrol, like whether it's through field trips or whatever it is, as potentials to get them to think more on like a just human level about the beings whose lives they impact. And yeah, to ask those more like emotionally charged questions might help.
Okay, that's all the time we have. Sorry.
No questions.